If y'all didn't see the last video where I talk about choosing the K swap in the 280Z, go check that out. But in short, I've got this K24 out of a TSX and I'm trying to swap it into my Datsun 280Z. Today I've got the transmission. This is the 370Z transmission. It's called like the 1EA0A something something. Very similar to the CD009. But this transmission has an internal slave cylinder. A lot of people don't like that internal slave cylinder because there's some reports of it breaking pretty often. But I went with the 370Z over the 350Z transmission, mostly because of the falsification, probably that newer is always better.
4 words to live by. New is always better.
And it should be a little quieter than the 350Z transmission. Figure a lot of the OEMs are going with the internal slave cylinder, probably for some really good reasons. So this giant 370Z transmission should fit in this tunnel. But we do have these dog ears where the old transmission mounts that we will have to cut those off. But before we get to that, we need to mount up the transmission to the engine using a Collins adapter plate. So Collins is a company that makes a lot of adapter plates for mounting different transmissions to different engines. I don't have my clutch kit yet, so we'll just be mounting the transmission with no clutch on, just to get a scope for how things will line up. So this is the Collins kit. It comes with a flywheel that's custom for the K24 to this transmission from the 370Z, mounting hardware. So this is the adapter plate that allows the bell housing of the 370Z to mount up to that K24. Nice aluminum billet piece. And this is the custom flywheel from Collins that goes up to the K24 block. And then this clutch area is for the 370Z clutch. So any aftermarket or standard 370Z clutch should work with this kit. But before mounting that up, I want to clean up the threads on a couple of these holes right here that the adapter plate bolts to. This one specifically looks really junked up. I don't know if it got cross-threaded or what happened to it, but I'm gonna try to clean those threads up and take off this automatic transmission harmonic balancer thingy. Now I'm just seeing that these bolts actually say AT on them, probably for automatic transmission. So I'm guessing I need new bolts to mount up the other flywheel to this guy. So this is called like a thread chaser or a thread cleanup tool to help clean up those threads and evacuate any metal shavings that come out. So it should go in like this just by hand. This troublemaker is all sorts of jacked up. The first half of the threads are still definitely messed up, but back in there about half of them are still good threads. And I measured the bolt and it looks like we'll grab all those threads in the back, so it should be alright. I'll just make sure to put some Loctite on it. To help with clearance and make it easier to move the engine around, I removed the intake manifold. I'll be going with an aftermarket one anyways. There's a little dirtiness going on, but not too bad. The stock engine has a solid metal coolant line that runs around the back of the head, which will have to be rerouted for a rear-wheel drive setup down the road. For now, I just removed the thermostat housing to get this metal line out of the way. The same goes for the upper coolant housing that sits at the back of the head. The stock outlet would point towards the firewall in a rear-wheel drive setup. So I'm going to take this housing off, and there's several aftermarket solutions that redirect the outlet around the engine to save that valuable space behind the engine. Getting the transmission to a similar height as the engine for lining up the bolts isn't trivial. I use different sized pieces of scrap wood and sometimes use the engine hoist to get everything at the right height. But I'm doing all of this just to do it all a couple more times. So it looks like we got a problem. Number one, I don't have enough bolts to go all the way around. Like here's an extra hole with some threads on the adapter plate. And then really the problem is I have 3 of these short bolts that go into these shorter holes, but the adapter plate and the transmission bell housing are both threaded. So you don't want to send a bolt through that because you'll just end up stripping the threads. One of these should be a through hole. So I'll have to contact Collins and see what they say about that. So here comes one of those irreversible changes. Once I do it, it's kind of hard to undo it. So we had these transmission ears that held up the stock 280Z transmission. And yeah, these are way too narrow to fit that 370Z transmission. So to cut these ears out, I'm just gonna cut on both sides right along here. I wanna leave this backing plate right here on both sides, just so I can have a little bit more strength here in case I weld my custom 370Z trans mount to this as well. So let's cut it up. So I just talked to Brett Collins, who engineered the adapter, and it seems that the kit was designed this way to have threads going both ways. So that way underneath the bell housing, you could have the bolt head on this side on the bell housing like all the other ones, and then thread into the adapter plate. But for me, the bolt head won't fit. So the other option is to drill out the holes in the adapter plate. So that way this is a through hole. And then my bolt heads will be on this side. So let's take this adapter plate off. So with the transmission off, you can see the 3 holes that are threaded on the bell housing. So I believe it's these 3 that have holes in the adapter plate that are threaded too. So we'll make through holes in the adapter plate. These new transmissions from Nissan are razor sharp with this aluminum. Thanks, Nissan. But of course I don't have the right drill bit for that diameter through hole, which is about 10.3 millimeters. So back to the hardware store. Let's try this again. The through holes worked perfectly and the 3 bolts at the bottom lined up great. I'm still missing a few bolts that go all the way around the bell housing, but Collins said the 8 bolts included had the required strength for the adapter plate. But they were happy to send me a few extra bolts anyways that I should be getting soon. Before sliding the transmission in, I need to remove the OEM shifter support bracket held in by 4 bolts. This OEM shifter bracket would put the shifter way too far back in my car and it'll end up just getting in the way. I'll have to go with an aftermarket kit to get the shifter in the right location for the swap, but more on that later. With the selector shaft pushed all the way inwards, I can hammer out the spring or roll pins without damaging the transmission. There's 2 of them, one inside the other. I take the inner one out first with a punch and then the outer one. I love this little punch and chisel kit I have. I use it all the time, link below. Once the pin is starting to come out the back, I pinch it closed with some vice grips to make it easier to hit out. No matter which way you put this handle, on this side or this side, it always hits something. I think I'm gonna grind it off and just use a wrench. So the breather on the valve cover is getting in the way of me getting the engine in the right spot. So K-Power offers a valve cover with this breather relocated in the middle of the cover. So they said they would take my core valve cover if I saw this off. I don't want to do it while it's on the car because then I'll get metal shavings all over and inside the head. So I got the shop vac here hooked up to give me some vacuum here to prevent any metal shards from going in. There might be some, but I won't be running the engine with this valve cover anyways. So I did some finagling to get the engine and transmission in this setup. So I got the engine hoist on a front mount just by itself, and then the transmission is down here being held up by my floor jack. So the engine needs some more work before it's finally ready for the swap, but the reason I'm mocking things up now is so that way I feel confident to order all of the parts I need. I need a starter motor, I need an alternator, I need a timing chain and timing tensioner kit. So I want to make sure that things are fitting pretty nicely as they are right now before I start to place those orders. The trans sits a little low, but I'm going to try to bring that up as high as I can. But other than that, I think it's going to fit really well. That girthy transmission was hitting the transmission tunnel, so I couldn't quite get it high enough. Poor Datsun, it's time to go back under the knife. Most of the interference actually happens up in this area on both sides, and it goes all the way up to the top. The 240Z actually doesn't have this reinforcement that goes all the way around. It just has these little pads on the sides for the transmission mounts. A lot of people complain about the 280Z being heavier than the 240, but you know, you have stuff like this that's actually kind of reinforcement to the chassis. So let's cut it out. My plan is to actually leave some of this area here on both sides, because for the custom trans mount, I might actually weld into this on the back side and bridge off of that. There's several ways to tackle this, of course, but for kind of more of an OEM look, I think I'm actually going to do an angled cut upwards and then remove the flange. You could also remove the spot welds that are holding this flange in place all along the edge, which would take a ton of work. I'll plan on reinforcing this area down the road, either with a custom transmission mount or cross member thing that I'll end up having to make. The angle grinder makes light work of the easy to access cuts, but then for the corners and tight areas, the Dremel pays off. And then I just do the same cuts on the backside. The grinding wheel helped me smooth things out and remove more of that excess metal. So this is another nerve-wracking part. I'll be grinding the transmission down just a little bit in a couple of areas. Like this sharp edge right here, I'll probably grind down. And then I looked at the internals of the transmission, and it looks like there's plenty of metal here between like this bolt hole and the outside of the transmission. So I'll probably grind this down just a little bit. Then on this side, we kind of have these little nubs here that I can grind down and make a little more smooth. Every little millimeter will help. So after some adjustments and fine tuning, we got the K24 in a great position in the engine bay, and I'm loving the way it all fits, including the 370Z transmission, which is pretty big. So the way I got it in here, the balancer was key. And then I got it off the balancer by resting the engine on some blocks. So I've got the engine hoist just holding the front of the engine up, and then I've got my floor jack in the back holding the rear of the transmission up. It's a little tricky holding the K24 up because it's a tilted motor since it's a front wheel drive engine. But because of that, it just wants to roll over all the way, or it wants to sit upright. But if you have the engine hoist holding it off center a little bit, that helps balance it out. So here you can see my engine hoist is holding the engine up. It's not quite dead center, and I have this bracket perfectly up and down, so that way it's more likely to stay balanced. And this is all just a mock-up to figure out how things will sit. It's not exact, it'll definitely be adjusted some, but for this initial mock-up, I lined up this crank bolt with the center right here in between the steering rack. And if we look underneath, what I'm most excited about is the oil pan is above that front cross member. So this is the cross member right there. And my oil pan is sitting above that, which is just awesome. And then my transmission is even sitting above my frame rails. So I was worried about it drooping since it's such a big trans and being lower than these two frame rails, but the fitment looks awesome. Oh wait, what the heck is that? What is that? If you guys are liking the content, make sure to give a thumbs up. And this floor jack is holding the transmission up from the OEM spot where the bushing goes. So that's a nice flat area that should be horizontal. And then to help me position the engine in terms of roll, so that's the angle from side to side. I have this scissor jack left over from my G35 that I can push up on the left side to help things be a little more level. So you can see here the oil pan is level. The Collins adapter will put the 370Z transmission in a nice vertical straight position, which will give you that lean for the K-Series engine, which is what you want to match the OEM spec. And then for the hood clearance, I think I'll be perfect. This is a little bit higher right now, as you can see, but my hood has a little bulge to it, so there will be plenty of room. And I did cut off this breather port on the valve cover. Thanks, plane. K-Power and some other guys offer a valve cover replacement that puts a breather hole, I believe, in the middle of the valve cover. So when I'm ready, I'm gonna buy that valve cover. But right now, since I'm mocking stuff up and this thing's gonna get scraped to hell, I'm just gonna keep this one and then swap out to the new one once I get better at putting the engine in and I'm done mocking things up. And cutting out the 280Z trans tunnel brace or bracket, you can see even with it removed, it is a pretty tight squeeze down here. So I'll definitely get out the flap disc and make that a little more flat and maybe even grind down the top of that bolt that's sticking out right there. But other than that, it fits really well. Technically right now I have clearance all around, but I obviously want a little more give. You can't have everything super close to the transmission and the engine because it will be moving some under load. The other side looks a lot better. The 280Z transmission tunnel actually isn't perfectly symmetrical. It's a little bit wider on the driver's side. So a common shifter to use with this trans or the 350Z trans is the CD 999 from Serial 9. And that allows me to place a shifter within a range from probably around here. The stock shifter location would be probably like way back here. Definitely don't want to be cutting that up and want to keep it as close to OEM as possible. And this is probably about as high as the transmission should go. I want to maintain a little bit of clearance between the tunnel and the transmission for the movement. This might be too little clearance actually, but we'll have to kind of see how it feels with the bushing that I use. So Z1 Motorsports has like a poly bushing that works with the 370Z trans. I might go with the OEM bushing though, just to keep the vibrations down. So again, this isn't the exact final positioning, but it's pretty darn close to how I want things to sit. So I'll have to make a custom cross member to hold in that 370Z transmission bushing, which will probably go around here. And I might tie that weld into the factory location for the 280Z trans. So I am waiting on the rear suspension kit from Apex Engineered, which will allow me to run a different differential. So once I get that differential mounted, I'll be able to finalize how the engine and trans is sitting so I can line up my drive shaft. Since I'm happy with the initial fitment, the ordering has begun and it is not cheap. Here's what I've ordered or already have so far. I have the K-tuned idler pulley with a belt to delete the power steering pump, a Haltech Elite 1500 with an O2 wideband sensor. There's a lot of reasons I'm going with Haltech, which I'll get into in a later episode, but these were on sale for Black Friday, so I had to pick it up. A Z-Speed clutch for the 370Z transmission, so that should work with the Collins flywheel. A timing chain kit. Some eBay sellers have nice prices on a full kit of basically everything you need, and it's genuine Honda. This is shipped from Japan, so it takes a little bit, but it was cheaper than buying individual parts from a dealer. I placed a hefty order with TF Works, including the exhaust manifold, the turbo. Yep, that's gonna be my car right there. The CD 999 shifter, as well as a radiator kit that hopefully fits, but it's gonna be tight. My old gas tank has tons of yellow crap in it from evaporated gasoline from over the years. It's likely safer and probably not much more expensive to get a new tank, so this is it. It's a universal tank from Tanks Inc. And with some fabrication and mounts, I should be able to get it to fit nicely. And I also ordered an in-tank fuel pump for this tank. Got an alternator with the random bolts and gaskets needed to assemble it. Here's a 40-degree VTC gear for the K-Series. So this will allow me to advance the timing more on the engine for tuning. For the transmission, I'm going to try to work with the OEM 370Z transmission bushing. I also ordered mostly Dutchworks, whatever it's called. I ordered most of their parts for fuel components. That's the fuel injectors, the rail, the damper, and a fuel filter. But then I plan on using a radium fuel regulator just because I like the way it looks and sits on the fuel rail. So here's the last batch of things that I got. I got the K-Power intake manifold. They had a special for the powder coated black for Black Friday. I think it looks awesome. I got this drive-by-wire throttle body. It's a Bosch unit. There's the part number. This is the one that K-Power recommends. I think they sell it on their website, but I got it through Rock Auto instead. It's just a really good drive-by-wire throttle body. I believe there's quite a few Porsche models that use this. I mean, look at the size of that thing for a 4-cylinder. That is big boy. T-shirt for the Black Friday special. Thank you, K-Power. And then these are OEM Honda flywheel bolts for the manual. My engine that I bought was an automatic, so you can see that these are actually quite a bit shorter. So you got to make sure to get the right length flywheel bolts from Honda. And then this is a remanufactured starter motor, but I might need to modify the bell housing on the transmission some. It's kind of dark in here, but starter motor goes in here. And then I guess there could be some interference on the bell housing, but we'll see what it looks like once we put it in with the Collins flywheel bolted up with these flywheel bolts. And yeah, I'm out of money for now. So I don't know what all the fuss is about. Engine swaps are easy. Piece of cake. Well, I wish it were that easy. There's a lot more work to come on this, so follow along with this build. And I'm gonna show you guys as much detail as possible on the engine swap. Thanks for watching. I'll catch y'all next time. Bye, y'all.